The idea of the big society as a phrase first originated, I think, in 2009, just before the 2010 general election in England. And it's originally credited to Samantha Cameron, the wife of the Prime Minister, because the idea was to say, look, it's not just about the argument, the political argument isn't just about the state, it's really about society more generally. So the question then arises, well, what do you mean by society? And that, I think, the idea is to try to enfranchise, to empower, to give freedom and support to all of those institutions that sit between the individual on one hand and the state on the other. And so for the average person, that would be local schools, that would be the hospital, that might be the church, it might be the bridge club, the sports club, all of those things. So instead of just focusing on the individual or focusing on the state, to think about it, liberating all of those institutions in between. There are two questions there. When it comes to the delivery of public services, then the idea is to free up many of the existing ones. So the government, since 2010, has initiated a huge new schools movement, creating new free schools which communities can set up for themselves, allowing existing state-funded schools to become much more independent, so-called academies, creating many more technical colleges, liberating higher education and further education. So that would be an example of how you free up public services. It's also about creating new institutions that can help with that, and they might be mutuals or co-ops or employee-owned firms. And so it's got both of those aspects, new and old, in it. I don't see the big society as a political program as just about things that have the word big society on them. It's about the whole shape of government policy. It's an overarching idea, an architecture for British government over the next 10, 20 or 30 years. And the really interesting thing is going to be to see whether future governments, whether they're a coalition government, a Conservative government or even a Labour government, might decide to take up many of these ideas and develop them for their own benefit. I think they will. For the country. I think this is a sea change in the direction of British politics. In Britain, over the previous 10, 20 years, but in particular under the previous government, there had been a great emphasis on what the state could do for you, on centralising public services, on pulling up power from local communities and from local government, and on a mentality that says government always knows best. And you saw that in things like big tax credit programs which were administered by the central state. And so what this was saying is actually we need not only to get away from that, but we need to realise all of the power that arises from social capital, from people when they're given their chance to show what they can do, and when an emphasis is taken away from a purely economic conception of what a human being is, towards something much richer and much more interesting. Don't forget that if you just think that a human being is an economic entity, then it's very natural to centralize because you think, well, we can bribe them with a few more benefits here or change their behavior with a few more tax increases or cuts there. So this is an entirely different shift of emphasis. On this view of an individual, the citizen is a much richer notion than just a consumer. So it's getting away from people just in a market context as consumers, much more towards freely activated, empowered people, driven by a feeling of public service or a feeling of wanting to give something back to their local communities. And one of the things that's so interesting about it is that those are ideas that have always existed in Britain. I mean, Adam Smith, as you may know, the great economist, his first book was not The Wealth of Nations, it was a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which talked about how we're all really motivated by fellow feeling. So it's, again, a big attempt to get away from just seeing people as economic robots driven by gain and towards a much bigger conception of what a human being is and what humans really want. I mean, when we came here and we asked someone for directions, they didn't ask her, they didn't say, is it in my interest to give these people directions? They just told us what the direction was to get here. So everyone, in fact, operates most of the time in a community, as it were, friendly, engaged way. So that's not new, that's very old. The challenge, the political challenge, is to feed that spirit, to grow that community spirit, so there can be a genuine, what you would call a Gemeinsinn, something that is actually knitting people together, a sense of public community spirit. And I think we're already seeing a lot of that in Britain as a result.